the age-old problem, and this kind of speaks to the whole COVID downturn thing, is that I run into so many folks in the business. Their goal and their idea of success is that they'll get to a point where they can get away from their business. And success and getting away from your business do not work in housing finance or real estate.
Welcome to a private conversation with me, Steve Robbins. I'm sitting down with some of the biggest names in Indianapolis real estate. I've enjoyed these conversations immensely, and I hope you will too. A big thank you to Executive GM Ian Soroyan and his whole team for hosting us at Cunningham Restaurant Group's Commission Row and Mel Speakeasy, located in downtown Indianapolis within the Pacer Sports and Entertainment Complex. Check out the show notes to learn more. And now, the owner and CEO of Ruoff Mortgage, Mark Music. Are you living in Naples half the time now, or what's your plan there?
So this year I've been down there probably the least since we've had our home because of things that were going on. Sarah's mother, who's 91, her home flooded. She had a water line break at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and by the time she woke up.
Where does she live?
So she lives in Fort Wayne.
Okay.
So she's 91. She's in the home that her and Dave Ruoff were in when he passed away. Okay. She's still driving. She still has her bridge club. She still has her little social things that she does. So she's remarkable. Her 92nd birthday is next Thursday. So We're going to come up to Fort Wayne for her birthday. But Sarah had to move her out of her home into an apartment for 3 months while she, which uproot somebody that age and all of a sudden put them into some sort of, different apartment, all of a sudden she's got neighbors and, that kind of thing. So we didn't want to leave until we got her back in her place. And so we barely got her in. We went down to Naples for about a week, and then comes Christmas. So we came up a week early for that. Then I get shingles. So that has us staying up, so we've only been down for maybe a 2.5 week stretch now, something like that. So anyways, maybe 3 weeks. So I get down there, and about 3 days in, even though I'm still working, I'm building a soccer stadium.
I'm going to talk to you about that.
Okay. I've got a commute that's down a pretty long hallway when I'm down there to my office, and I've got at least 3 of the 5 days I've got pretty full schedule, and then the other 2 are kind of depending on what's going on, whether I'm busy or not. And my back is bad, so in the past I've always been kind of wrestling with getting things I need to get done so that I can go, hopefully get out and play some golf in the afternoon or something. And so that's off the table.
So you're not playing golf at all right now?
Just very, very little. Like sometimes 9 holes with Sarah.
Okay.
I've since September 1st, I've played two 9-hole rounds and 2 18-hole rounds.
How much do you miss it?
Initially, I missed it a lot. It's weird and you've got friends that, I know you're not a big golfer. You've got friends that golf, and for a lot of people that don't really get into it, it doesn't even make sense to them, right?
It makes sense to me. I just don't like it as much. Part of that's because I'm not very good. I haven't committed the time to getting that.
So there it is. That is the piece. It's like the falling in love with it usually comes when the level of commitment comes up a little bit, and all of a sudden, along with that comes expectations and appreciation for the challenge, the wonderful elation you have on those special days where you actually master it, know, and even though those days don't happen that often,
but they keep bringing you back.
It's a lot like business, you probably get your nose bloodied more times than you hit those high moments,
right?
And it's getting your nose bloodied. The contrast of that to when you have something great happen that makes the adrenaline rush, et cetera, around that special accomplishment or that special day. Captivating, I think.
So what have you doing to replace it?
So back in 2019, I had some buddies. One of them is a principal agent at the time up in Fort Wayne with a long time brokerage. John Bellio, maybe you know of him with the Caldwell Banker
Okay.
dealership up there. Roth Really Graber. Um, he and some of his, he's a lifetime soccer guy. He and some of his buddies decided they wanted to start a real low level pro soccer club in Fort Wayne with the intention of at some point in time getting a stadium and playing at a higher level. And so he asked me if I was willing to, I think at the time, make like a $40,000 investment in it. And I'd never played an organized minute of soccer in my life and probably had less interest in it than what you might have for the game of golf. The 3 or 4 times I tried to watch it, it just couldn't pull me in, so to speak.
Right.
So, I'm like, yeah, I'll sit over here and it'll be kind of cool to say I own part of a club, but, I don't want to have any involvement. I don't do things very often where I have partners. And I never do things when I have partners if they're things that I really care about.
Right.
Or if I do have partners, they're so diminished in what.
Are you saying you're a control freak?
I think I am.
A lot of successful people are.
It's so I've got friends that are pretty decent in business, and maybe one of the most attractive parts of it is going and finding somebody else that they really like and partnering and doing that with somebody. So kind of like what you're doing, right?
Yes, I enjoy having partners, but I can also see the beauty of what you're talking about.
I see that, and I at times I wish that maybe I could be more that way. Like maybe there would be something, different or something more that I would get out of it going down that path. But for me, it feels like it's just so much less efficient. That you're always trying to reach consensus.
Yep.
And so the older I've gotten, we all begin to recognize that we have a little less in the tank when we start the day. Doesn't mean we can't do as much or maybe even do more, but it means we have to be a lot more strategic about where we use that energy and when we use it, right? And so if half of the time is spent building consensus to do what you feel like the company should be doing, you're burning energy there, and that's taking away from the actual execution or getting that to the finish line so you can move on to the next thing. And so I never could master that. And there is something incredibly efficient about hearing everyone around the table, and really listening to their ideas, etc. Processing that, looking, if I've got something I want to do, looking for the person in the room that thinks it's a bad idea,
right?
And have, rather than people around the table that are making me happy and doing what Mark wants to do, I'm interested in the person that doesn't necessarily agree with it, and then try to, take a step back and objectively look at that and see if there's, and usually the challenge with most really good ideas or really good opportunities are unintended consequences. And the best way you can, vet it is to get the people that would say that's a bad idea, and then why is that a bad idea? And a lot of times it reveals something that was kind of a blind spot you didn't see, right?
Yes.
And sometimes it means leaving the room and actually going out to people, boots on the ground, so to speak, and asking them about, what's your perspective on this? And sometimes you have an aha moment and you go, okay, that's a horrible idea. For people in our organization, the big challenge is, if they haven't been with us very long, is that I'm slinging stuff all the time. and as quickly as I
Meaning
can.
ideas.
Yeah, and so it's kind of difficult sometimes for people to understand that, you know, Mark was just spitballing or brainstorming with something,
Right.
and at that point at which it becomes clear to me that it's a bad idea and there's no way to bend it or shape it, I drop it and move on pretty quickly. And sometimes people don't realize that I've, you know,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
You were throwing it out there. So how has that changed, really, if at all, as it relates to your son Blake being president? And how has your role changed with Blake's essentially promotion?
this is the way I would describe it. For the first 25 years of my adult life, when it came to, you know, and with a couple exceptions in my early 20s, from the time I was 25 on, I've never worked for somebody else. So I've done quite a few entrepreneurial things, some with some decent success, some without decent success. But the one thing that was probably cathartic for me at around 45 was I really stopped trying to fix myself. And instead of,
What did you think needed to be fixed?
there's some things I'm not very good at, you know, just sort of how my natural inclination is, right? And I think everybody's built that way.
Yeah.
There's things that, and so there's some things, a lot of times, that someone's not very good at just because they don't like it. They don't like doing that. There are times where they might be good at it and they just don't like it, but usually where there's not passion or there's not some sort of, you know, natural magnetism that takes place, then you probably don't come at it with the same zest, right? And I'm not somebody that is, I like control and I like structure, but I'm unfairly enjoying it more when it's all of the things around me.
Mm-hmm.
Rather than trying to put me into a specific box and say, this is your lane and this is what you do.
Right.
And so with Ruoff, the thing that I feel like was, you know, critical or important to maybe have a fair amount more success was that I didn't try to keep, you know, it's almost like somebody that goes on a New Year's resolution and, you know, they got the gym membership or they've got this or they've got that, and usually they're just completely upheaving their life to try to change or fix this one part that they don't like about it, right? And it's not, it's a program or a plan. It's not changing your lifestyle in a way that this is what it's going to be from now on, you know? So things that tend to be more custodial, things that tend to be more of a maintenance kind of a thing, I like to chase and like to get something in place and get it going and then support it with strategy ideas, in understanding that nothing's ever done and everything has to always be optimized or modified based on the marketplace or employees' needs change, that kind of stuff, you know. So for me to be able to as small as Ruoff was, for it to be large enough that I could get some pieces in place that could shore up where I knew that I was the weakest,
Right.
Left me with more time to do the stuff that I was excited about when I woke up in the morning. So then it doesn't feel like you're working as often. So what your question was with Blake and
Yeah.
secession, might be the hardest part of the lifespan of any company.
Right.
And
Your role, you're still chairman, CEO, Blake's president. And
mhm.
so
And so
how's the baton being passed over time?
so it's almost like 2.0, and to the extent that I described that I allowed others to excel in the areas that I wasn't as interested in, it still left me with certain things that I had to do, and some of them I wasn't, in my own assessment, I wasn't really adequate or was deficient.
Got it.
And so I don't know if it's a I don't think it's a self-confidence thing, but it's,
Well, it might just be good self-understanding.
well, it's, there's some self-awareness in there, but I do think that I don't like to fail. I'm not afraid of failing, but I don't like to do something poorly when I recognize that my natural gifts just don't position me to do well with something like that. So something like this is just horrible for me. When I'm on stage, so like I can sit in a meeting, and you can reflect back at this. I can sit in a meeting.
This is not going horribly.
Okay.
Not at all.
Okay. Well, so you can reflect back on. So here's the thing. Sometimes I think it went horribly, and it went horribly. Other times I'll feel like, and what I'm speaking of is like maybe I've got to address a large group.
I know what you're saying.
And it feels more, even when it's not scripted, it's scripted, right? Anytime it's you got to land your plane, right? You got to stick the landing, and you got to get from here to here, and you got to be succinct and all that kind of stuff. But there's something about being on stage and being watched versus if I come down to High Garden and sit with you and your partners in a room, and we collaborate and talk about if there's an opportunity to do something or whatever. I love those moments.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like when I leave the room in those moments that I suck. When I come off stage, I really feel horribly about myself. I really feel like I wish I could be that person that, just has everybody hanging from the rafters because they're so excited. Just that. And I'm not that.
I know what you mean.
I'm not wired that way. So with
I'm not
Secession
really
now, it actually has allowed me to even pull away more from those pieces before.
Right.
That and sometimes those things land on Blake's shoulders. Sometimes they land on other people in the C-suite.
Yeah.
But more than anything else, I'm focused on the people side of it, strategy. What are we doing with our service offering? Those kinds of things, and probably a little bit less visible. I've talked to a lot of people about Secession, and what's interesting is you get advice, but Secession, particularly at the top, happens so infrequently, and it really is kind of a coin toss as to whether it goes well or doesn't go well. And the important takeaway for me is that it's not the natural inclination when you look at it is you think it's a reflection on whoever the next person was.
Right.
And it might be less about that person than it is about
what the previous person,
the predecessor left and how they transferred that power, so to speak, right? Yeah. And so for example, this is a challenge for me with Blake. We've talked about this longer timeline and this more gradual process. The problem with that, it's wonderful. It keeps everybody more calm around you. But the problem with that is it undermines the ability of that person to really lead day to day the way they need to be able to have a chance to make the team their team.
Right.
Because everyone's kind of looking over their shoulder or looking, my shadow is still casting. I'm still in those meetings, to your point, as market control freak. And so this is not necessarily a Mark thing. It is a Mark thing, but I think it's something that has some universal elements to it, is that we do things the way we've done them. And as much as I like change and mixing up the script, I have kind of a way that I come at things. And if the train station is a solution or an outcome that worked out well, there's a lot of different train tracks that go to that train station.
Yep.
And I like the tracks that I take to get there, right? And so to be able to step back fairly and say, we can go this other direction because that might be the way Blake wants to go, or that might be the way that Clint wants to go, or etc. But then even give it one additional layer, and that is that if we chose that route and the train went off the tracks, I can't say that the tracks I wanted to take were the right way, because they could have gone off the tracks the way I went, right? But my natural inclination would be, or I think a lot of people would be, see, I knew we should have done this, right? So to be able to stay back, and now it's not so much about the train came off the tracks, it's more about, okay, how do we get back on the tracks, rather than trying to litigate and go back and talk about, things like I told you so, or this is why, and there's probably a learning moment for everybody, even for somebody that didn't want to go that direction, right? Or there might have been something that still came out of that strategy.
Yeah.
That we scrapped a piece of it that didn't work, but there were some good takeaways that we could still apply to whatever we were trying to accomplish. So
the first time I heard the name Mark Music, so I think, what year was this? It was probably 2012, I think.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people might not even know the history of this, but Amy and with Ryan had been instrumental in Fairway coming to Indiana. And the crash was happening, and it was a bloodbath for our company, for her, for everybody that I knew in the real estate world. And she did her and Ryan together did a detour with a different mortgage company.
So I.
And she goes back to Fairway. And she comes home one day and says, Steve, Ryan's talking about Ruoff Mortgage, and I've just, and maybe wants me to join him over there, and I'm actually going to have lunch with Mark Music, the owner of Ruoff. And she's like, but I don't know why I'm doing this, really just because of Ryan, and there's no chance I'm not making the same mistake I made again. She comes home and says, well, I really liked him. And I'm thinking about it. And she was so adamant that there was no chance that this was happening. And after a lunch with you, you turned it all around pretty quickly. And what do you remember about that lunch?
Well, I'll give you a quick backstory as to how I ended up pursuing the strategy that I pursued. I would take this approach quite a while, or quite frequently. They had a team. My recollection is that when they made a move to a company that's no longer in business today,
right,
but was an up-and-comer at the time, Amy made a big sacrifice by leaving the position that she was running a pretty successful branch to go over and start a branch with this company.
Yeah.
It didn't go well. They had all kinds of struggles. And they go back to that company, and she still has her team, but now there's somebody else in her seat, and you can't expect that, right? So So there was a kind of a double cost, this disruption to their business and whatever, and then you come back and probably the branches continued to do well, et cetera. So yet she still had a nice team and the unit was together, right? And they were doing well.
They were
doing very well. She was the senior and Ryan was the junior.
Yes.
Right?
I don't know if you know this quick story. I started with the home builder and the mortgage side. Ryan and I started in 97. Amy trained me in mortgages. She was the senior mortgage loan consultant for Crossman Mortgage. And Ryan started maybe a month after I did, and she trained Ryan. So Amy really trained us both in mortgages. And so, she was always the senior in that.
She was always right. Yeah, yes. She was the mentor, et cetera, right?
Yes.
So for me, whenever I was going into a new market, or I was, whoever I was trying to identify as a good target to recruit, I always thought the person that's sitting at the top had by far the most to risk to make a change because they're sitting in the best position, right? And a lot of times they don't feel like their world is broken to begin with, so it's a little bit more difficult to contrast something enough to make it compelling for someone to roll the dice. I always felt like if I could find the number 2 person who there's all indications that, they had, tools that would allow them to succeed and do well, and suddenly they could move up, it wouldn't be a lateral move, that there'd be an opportunity for,
right.
And so I ended up, but I believe when I met with Ryan, he took the, how polite Ryan is, Ryan took the call, but I hear this all the time when I'm meeting with people. I love my company, I love my situation. I'm happy to meet with you and have lunch and talk to you, and learn about yourself. But just so you don't have the wrong impression, it's, pigs are going to fly before I change companies.
Right.
And I just want to have a chance to sit down and talk. Right.
Right.
So we ended up having like a 3.5-hour lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost like a first date. And so on a first date, there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of energy and stuff, and so you kind of pick at your food, and when you're, all of a sudden they're taking it away, and you realize you only took 3 bites because you're, maybe a good first date, right? Because you're actually
you're talking.
Yeah, you're talking and you're getting to know each other. So things went much better than even I expected, and I could tell that Ryan wasn't someone that was a huge risk taker, but I could tell he was really captivated. And so we kind of pushed down this path. And the whole time he's thinking, well, I've always been with Amy.
Right.
And so I think at one point I finally said, look, I would love to talk to her. And I do believe that there's an opportunity for both of you that, if you look back in 5, 6, 7 years, you'll say, hey, this was a better move. I also recognize that, if Amy decides she wants to come, it would be because she wants to come. And I really had low expectations that I would be able to convince her to come. And
so did I.
There was maybe a piece of it where I was maybe just appeasing Ryan to say, look, I do want to have a conversation. Not that I didn't think that she was terrific. I knew the reputation. In fact, Clint had some familiar. There were some Fort Wayne connections between.
Well, Amy grew up in Fort Wayne,
and Ryan's wife,
Erica,
right? So there's just all these little tentacles, and so I remember we met at Ruth and Izzy's or whatever out on the north side, out by
Harry and Izzy's.
Or Harry and Izzy's, rather, on the north side.
Okay.
And I was really impressed with what I would say, like, Ryan's heart. and just you could just tell what a quality person he was.
Definitely.
And then I'm having lunch with Amy, and I think I told her 7 or 8 times in that meeting, like just the grace that just the fact that she wouldn't tell Ryan to pack sand and that she would agree to come and sit down and talk to me, that I was really, and it wasn't ceremonial.
Right.
She actually came, engaged, sincerely listened, asked questions. The way the two of them are wired, I would say that Amy is more likely, if something is troubling her, or if there's something that she's concerned about, she's going to be a little more anxious and a little more persistent to make sure that something's the way she feels like it should be. And I mean, I picked up on that even back at that point in time. So she was very cautious. I felt like we had a good first meeting, but she was still tamping down the expectations upon leaving. I didn't know that for certain that, like, Ryan would, if Amy didn't come, that Ryan wouldn't come. But I thought, boy, this could really be magic if there was somehow that we could convince Amy that there was still a really good opportunity here.
Yes.
To do this. And it was a critical point, and one of the things that really served Ruoff well, and maybe me more specifically, being somebody that never spent a day in the business before I came to Ruoff, was that we never really came at our platform with respect to new people coming on board, where we're trying to bend them and force them to do it this one way. We were more interested in kind of best practices industry-wide, and to the extent that somebody like myself, who hasn't been at a bunch of places, wouldn't know some of these sort of standard meat and potato things. And then other instances would be that somebody has worked someplace or 4 places, and the same thing grates on them at every single place. And when they ask about it, they get the same sort of explanation that doesn't really explain why you do it this way when they've got this other idea in their head as to how it should be done. And we go, well, let's take a look at that and let's see if there's something that we can do. So when you get newer folks that come on board, put a lot of trust in something, but also feel enfranchised, where it doesn't mean that we're going to do everything you want to do when you come here, but we're going to, in the same way that Amy sat down and engaged and sincerely listened, we want to try to come at it with that approach. And what we learned is that it just kept making the company better.
Mission Row offers an unforgettable dining experience with high-quality steaks, a raw bar, and exquisite seafood curated by an expert culinary team. The menu, designed to delight every palate, features seasonal ingredients paired with an extensive wine and spirit selection. Open weekdays from 4 p.m. and for brunch at 10 a.m. on weekends. Continue the evening at Mel's Speakeasy below. After dining, enjoy an after-dinner drink with a wide selection of wines, cocktails, and spirits. Open daily from 5 p.m., Mel's is perfect for relaxing and unwinding. Commission Row and Mel's Speakeasy, an unforgettable dining experience awaits. Her and Ryan both had certainly in the beginning felt that you were listening and that they had good ideas that they knew in practice were best practice, and that you guys were open-minded to. And maybe to go back and provide a little context. So I saw July of 2007 when you purchased the company from David Ruoff. Is that correct?
Yeah. So how that went though was, so actually in July of 2007, I came in. Dave had the company sold.
Okay.
They'd been struggling
sold to somebody else?
Yeah. So the real estate market kind of trailed the mortgage, the way I would describe it. So
yes,
you had couple different refi booms, and I'm going to have the years wrong because I wasn't participating in them, but it was like a '03 or '04 range, and then there was like an maybe it was like '02 and then like '04 to '05 kind of thing, where there were these nothing like COVID, but
Right.
some pretty good years.
Yes.
And this was when I don't want to mention names, but a lot of production builders, et cetera, were building more houses than we needed for a stretch, and
True.
the credit standards that didn't prove to be very durable in terms of default rates and all that kind of stuff. But the mortgage business had gotten to where it was very heavily commoditized. No lending standards. There was no way to really be good at what you did because nothing was hard.
Right.
And so they had been struggling. He was 78, just had a pacemaker put in. He had a non-family member that had been running the company for 10 years who decided to leave and go start his own company. A few of the people left and followed the guy that was, 45 or 50, rather than not knowing what the succession plan was going to be. And, Dave had the option of just closing his doors and riding off. He'd gone from 1984 to, he was over 50 years old when he started the company.
Okay.
It was a single location branch, but they had a nice reputation. It was a very successful business in that stretch, until all of a sudden the last 2 or 3 years, it became very, very difficult, and they were losing money, and he wasn't going to sit there and hang around and just lose money to lose it.
Right.
So,
and you met him because he is your wife's
yes,
father.
Yes.
Sarah's father.
And so she and I talked about it. She's got an insurance company that still exists today and does really, really well. That back in those days and earlier was pretty heavily predicated off captive lead source.
Okay.
It's not that way today, but it was back then. And so she had personal interest in not maybe seeing the company go someplace else because it would probably have an adverse impact to her business. So I think she was a little bit conflicted about it. I was a little bit conflicted about it. And my father-in-law, David, was, there was part of it where, he wanted to win. He didn't want to just close the business or whatever. And, but he also, I think in his mind, probably felt like it didn't matter who would come in here. That's just kind of the state of where the industry was. And he told me, he goes, I don't think I would sell this thing to my worst enemy. So I agreed to come in, and almost kind of secretly, I guess, just to come in and act like I was going to come in and originate or something. I was going to start a commercial channel of lending to open up some new products and stuff. But I was coming in just to kind of size things up and decide whether I wanted to get involved or not. And I think 60 days in that process, I was telling him that I don't know if this is going to be something we want to do or not.
Okay.
And then in August of '07, it was Ruoff Mortgage, big lender in Fort Wayne.
Yes.
It was rumored they were having some financial issues, et cetera. And all of a sudden they did a quick sale to American Home Mortgage out of New York. 3 weeks later, there was reports all of a sudden that maybe Countrywide, the beast of lenders, was maybe not going to have enough liquidity to fund their business through the winter. And it clearly appeared to be suddenly that this was going to be a business that was difficult. It was clear that defaults were starting to shoot up, and that there was going to suddenly be a lot of rulemaking, a lot of compliance. It was going to be more challenging to manufacture the mortgages because of all the rule adherence that had to, and so it suddenly became really interesting to me. So when it's easy, it's probably not a very good opportunity, right? Or if it is, it won't be for very long because other people will figure out how easy it is and they'll come in, and then all of a sudden everybody's going to get squeezed. With the mortgage industry, that probably was a very, very necessary piece for us, or for myself, to come in and have some kind of a prayer at making the thing turn around and get to where it got to. So so anyways, you brought up the financial. So my point, I guess, is that real estate still kind of chugged along even past the Great Recession. And it wasn't until like '09, maybe early 2010, probably '09, and TARP and all that, all that kind of stuff, that it started to suddenly
Thaw out
squeeze.
a little bit.
You're seeing veteran realtors who had always just killed it.
Oh yeah.
That, it's all of a sudden, the tide's going out, and some of these guys made great money, and then there was not an appreciation for. They weren't great savers necessarily. They had great lifestyles and stuff, but they actually, borrowed for a lot of their toys and just didn't necessarily have real good financial acumen, apparently, right? And all of a sudden, they're, maybe they had a line of credit that they would draw from when they get into a little bit of a slump, and it was never, they'd get hot, they'd pay it back down or whatever, and all of a sudden they're drawing from it again, and all of a sudden now they don't have that line of credit anymore.
Absolutely.
So anyways, yeah, so it was, so I keep running you over, but
No, you're not at all.
But you were saying about the meltdown that you brought up 2012.
Well, I really, I guess where I was going with that was I guess it was '07 or '08. From what I understand, you had 18 employees and did 50 million in loan volume. And then in 2021, you're over 1,000 employees with 5 billion in loan volume. That's absolutely amazing.
Well, so I feel like,
so you started with the one office in Fort Wayne.
Yes.
And it grew from there.
Yeah, I think we got up to a high of, maybe 1,250 employees or something. We're now under 1,000.
Okay.
But I look at 2007 to through 2019 as a real good yardstick of what to me wasn't artificial in any way. The COVID stuff was great, and what happened was the rewards came in at an unbelievable level. I felt like they came in more so for our company than a whole lot of companies because of what we'd built during that time. It allowed us we had a pipeline that was much more elastic than others. I saved every nickel I could save. So you needed a lot of capital because you couldn't get others to take your servicing for a pretty good stretch. They were tightening up so the first 6 months of 2020 were scary.
I remember.
And so we had your interest rate risk.
Yes.
So you got these trading desk accounts, and part of our business is the deal that you can get. So we talk about being able to go direct to Fannie and Freddie and Ginnie and stuff, but it's also you're hedging your interest rate risk and what is your cost to hedge. And the higher your net worth is one of those 2 or 3 pillars that they determine how they're going to price you, because you're doing all that stuff on margin.
Right.
And so they have to know that when there's margin calls, you got the liquidity.
Yes.
Right. And so both they can give you more capacity, and if it simply means you're getting a half a tick or a basis point and a half better pricing on the transactions you're doing, it's like clipping coupons, but all year long it extrapolates into a decent difference in terms of basis points that drop to the bottom line. So we didn't have enough warehouse capacity. No one did, but we were undersized versus what our demand was to a lesser extent than competitors were.
Okay.
We had, and so in the same way that you have warehouse capacity, the funding that you use at the closing table to pool your loans and deliver them into the secondary market, you also had a cap on the hedging you were doing on your interest rate risk. So if you've got a pipeline, maybe you've got enough authority through your trade desk accounts to hedge $250 million of credit commitments at any one point in time. But now you've got a sales team that, they're shooting fish in a barrel, and, they're bringing you $400 or $500 million in commitments. So what do you do there, right? So we were undersized, and everybody was. We were undersized, but we were undersized to a much lesser extent, and so I feel like that was a wonderful. And then what happened is, if you go, oh wow, I need more capacity, no banks were. In fact, banks were going to a whole lot of lenders and saying, this is too dicey, and so we're gonna reduce your line, or we're not going to renew your line when it comes due. And so all of a sudden they had less capacity. So we went probably through 2020 mostly dealing with the facilities that we had, but we were probably one of the first to be able to get those expanded. And so 2021 became just as prolific for us as 2020 was. But for me, it's that 2007 to 2019 that was
The growth.
It just felt like, whether we had a good year or a bad year economically, whatever the whole market was doing, the whole mortgage industry market was doing, we just grew at a faster rate in those periods where there was maybe a little bit of a contraction in terms of the overall loan production. Right. And usually when it was contracting, originators at other companies were less happy, and so it made them, maybe a little more easy to have a conversation with and get them to pull over. And we just knew that if the market was only, if it was going to maybe, pull back 5% instead of growing 15 or 20% this year, we're going to have to get more aggressive and try to grow at 25 or 30% to keep. I mean, we went 10 consecutive years of making the Inc. 500, 5,000 list. And if you look at so the challenge with that is then all of a sudden you have a couple COVID years where your revenue and loan volume, your loan volume doubles and your revenue, I don't even want to give the multiple of what that moved.
Right.
Those become your markers now to keep winning it, right? So we had to kind of get things to normalize again before we can begin trying to chase those sort of honors again. But
so you had the one office in Fort Wayne. What was the decision like to move outside of Fort Wayne? And was with Amy and Ryan in Indianapolis. Is that the first real move outside of Fort Wayne?
It wasn't. So I think. So I came to Dave at Thanksgiving in 2007 and said, I think we're going to do this. I think we're going to go ahead and it was kind of a unusual transaction that it was almost completely oral. And if it wasn't oral, it was just jotting down on a legal pad, this is how we're going to do it. Okay. And it wasn't like a day one formal closing kind of a thing. And Dave said there's some advantages for us to just understand that this is yours now, and not make changes, and I'll still hang my hat in here. Well, he was a people person, right? And
he kept coming to the office the whole time, didn't he?
Well, he to 2012, and then it's funny, we had to, look, it's that confusion that it creates, like I'm describing with Blake,
right?
Where you have to, where there's not the. I think there was clarity. But even when you think that it's as crystal clear as possible, it still leaves confusion. Even if it's not inside the organization, it leaves confusion outside the organization. So,
what was the first one outside of Fort Wayne?
So what I knew was that I was in a company that looked like it was from the 1980s Soviet Union in terms of the technology and stuff that they had. So I knew before we did anything remotely, we didn't really have IT infrastructure where we were, and if we're going to have remote offices and systems and things, that we needed that. So I spent the biggest part of 2008 trying to shore up, getting a decent accounting software in place. We had our origination software was a separate product from the software we closed loans in, and so that was messy, and everything was, if you heard the story recently, the Doge story about Social Security office for retirement. They've got this Iron Mountain mine shaft in eastern Pennsylvania so apparently when federal employees retire, this is all still on manila folders in these big Iron Mountain boxes stored in a mine in Pennsylvania. To this day, if you're retiring next month, they hand calculate everything, fill out all the paperwork. They can, there's 700 of them, 700 employees there. They're probably Iron Mountain employees, and they close 10,000. They complete paperwork for 10,000 federal employees to retire per month. If there's 15,000 that retire, then 5,000 have to wait for their process. There was this big file storage room in the lower level at Ruoff that was the last 12 months transactions, maybe it was the last 24 months, and then they would go off site to Iron Mountain. And so if you had a customer you wanted to work with and you wanted to be able to spare the customer some time and be able to pull up their old file and then just identify the things that have changed, you'd have to send out to Iron Mountain, and maybe within 48 hours you'd have the file, and then you could continue on with your engagement with your borrower.
Wow. So
we got everything digitized, and that was quite a bit of scanning, as you can possibly imagine.
Yeah, I can.
And so they were still large PDF files, but we then began that process of everything ultimately being in the cloud and stuff. So we went to Warsaw, Indiana, and the reason I went to Warsaw was I thought if I go to a big stage like Indianapolis and we don't have everything accounted for and I fail, I was worried that I may not be able to come back to Indianapolis a second time.
Okay.
So that was so I thought we'll go to Warsaw, and Warsaw was kind of like our guinea pig.
Why Warsaw?
Small market, probably a little slower moving, not quite the hustle bustle. If we failed, we failed in Warsaw. Maybe we disqualified ourselves from Warsaw for a long time. I didn't want that to be in the largest market in the state, right? So we went to Warsaw. Things went really, really well. We actually did a vanilla box new space build out because we thought this was going to be something we needed to get some experience with.
Okay.
Then we went up to Elkhart and went to South Bend. And the whole time I'm looking at Indianapolis, but I'm thinking, okay, let's go a little larger at Elkhart, let's go a little larger to South Bend. And I think we pulled in Plymouth. We opened another branch in Fort Wayne, and then went down to Indianapolis. So that was still fairly early in the process. That was one of the natural aspects of the company still being, it was probably under 100 employees when, 80, 85 employees. It gives those earliest folks the most voice, so to speak, you know what I mean, and easier to get attention and that kind of thing. And so they got to be a part of a whole lot of what we did. It's interesting. To look at various markets, it really shines a bright light on the fact that it's a people business at the end of the day. And as much as we have all these methods of generating leads online and how the business, the big challenge today is it just feels more transactional than it's ever felt. So, and when it's transactional, brand loyalty is difficult to establish, right? And but in each of these instances, there was this individual, sometimes two individuals, that when we brought them in, you get a terrific um, team member, but in most instances, what we needed in the worst way back then was credibility, and they would bring their credibility to what you were doing, and it would slow others down long enough to give you an opportunity to prove yourself. Now, that's when, you still have to prove yourself, right? And that's where, if you're not equipped to execute the way you need to, it kind of that fear that I described, where if I go into a market and get it wrong,
Right.
It's difficult to.
What were some of the biggest challenges with coming to Indianapolis?
It's a fast-paced market. All larger cities are fast-paced market, and so even if you want, and this might speak to, even though you've got a lot of people, fairly common when you look at big cities, that a whole lot of people weren't from there. They migrated there from Fort Wayne,
Right.
from all sorts of other smaller towns. But it feels like everything moves at a faster pace, and so when you're trying to slow people down to have a conversation, they want, while they're walking by, they just want you to, they've got 4 or 5 things that they believe in their mind are the only things that matter or that are important. And I find this is probably not right to say this, but I find it even more with men. They want to know this, and this. And ideally, you've done a lot of recruiting in your time.
I have.
Right? And done quite well with it. And in any kind of sales, you need to slow somebody down and have a full-throated conversation about slowing them down to get them to think a little bit, right? They kind of maybe have in their mind these preconceived things that are the most important things, but if you bring up something else that isn't on their list, and you say, well, this isn't important to you. Oh, no, that's important to me. Then all of a sudden you start to get into a conversation, and then, and I find that in larger markets, it's more difficult to get people to want to slow down. It's like their time is more valuable, maybe, or maybe it's because they're getting solicited far more often, and so there's that part of it, right?
For sure.
But I always have felt like that there's exceptions both ways, but that women overall are more inclined to have a more thoughtful engagement with you, and they've got a wider range of concerns that aren't, what am I going to make? Some of these most,
Right.
they've got just a larger number of priorities.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, in 2025, you're probably not supposed to make those sort of generalizations, but that's just kind of what I found. I just felt like that and so we probably, for a long stretch, particularly when I was doing most of the recruiting, we probably had a bias where we probably had more female originators than we had male originators. I think the industry probably is a little bit male dominated, and some companies you'll see are very, very heavily male dominated, and we probably made a shift in that direction in terms of having some of those recruiting responsibilities delegated to other team members, and they connected better when they were talking to a guy maybe than what I did.
Okay.
But that was so we really, between Warsaw, we did a new build out in Elkhart. We took an existing space that wasn't that old in South Bend, in a really cool kind of upscale area, and did some remodeling and stuff, and so and it's interesting that it's a different world today, but at that time, I think there was a challenge we had at the first branch office when I came in, was nobody was coming into the office, and even though this was not kind of work from home kind of a thing, back then, people were convinced that there was no value in coming into the office. And so I really felt like that those early years trying to come up with different creative ways to pull people in, and it's difficult because you have to use things like, you know, lunch carry-ins and a bunch of old analog things like that. But what I wanted was for there to be collaboration and for there to be a social environment and appreciation where you actually viewed your team members as an asset.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's more and more challenging in today's market. And so as we were really focused on terrific office space and an office environment, there's at least somewhat of a pivot. We still put a lot of emphasis trying to pull people in. We don't have them in as much as we once did, but we still try to pull them in, and we still feel like, all things being equal, having a place that doesn't feel like
to feel like you're part of something.
Yeah.
I think it's critically important. And the work from home stuff, while I understand it, it takes away from some of the best parts of being on a team and feeling like you're part of a team. And I'm glad that, you know, we're getting more back to that, and hopefully we continue to do across the country. So 2017 was a pretty good year for you. You won the Ernst & Young award for in financial services for Entrepreneur of the Year. Is that correct?
Yeah, it didn't start out terrific.
Didn't you also win the Indianapolis 500?
Later that year, yeah. So it started out, I lost my father that year.
Okay.
So I didn't think it was going to be after that event. I know you experienced similar loss. Yeah. Yours was probably more heartbreaking from the way it happened versus, my father had Alzheimer's, and so it was something where it was kind of a, maybe a relief when he finally passed. But anyways, it's that moment in life that reminds us of our own mortality, that kind of thing, right? So that's how it started. But then, I got nominated by EY for the Entrepreneur of the Year competition, and wasn't sure how I felt about it. I was excited about it, but I also kind of quickly dismissed that I didn't probably have. There's a lot of great entrepreneurs out there, kind of a thing, right? So that was, we advanced, then we advanced again, and then ended up winning the Miami Valley, which is Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana region, and went on to out to California for the finals that fall. But that was followed up with a win in right before we won the Miami Valley, actual award, we won the Indianapolis 500.
Right.
And
how did it come about? Was it last minute for your sponsorship?
It was.
I don't remember the exact story. But
it was. We decided a year earlier that we thought this would be a great branding opportunity, and so we almost did a car the year before with Andretti, and at the last second, I just said, no, this is too big of a step. And then the following year, I think we decided we weren't even going to engage. Had a lot going on and stuff, and then all of a sudden, Michael Andretti called me the week before, and they still didn't have a sponsor, and they had Takuma Sato in the car, and he was fast.
Yeah.
And so I got I'm playing in a golf tournament. It's like a Sunday. It's raining, so I got my phone buried in my bag so it doesn't get damaged or whatever. And I think we ended up winning the tournament we were playing in, so we're having a couple pops afterwards, celebrating and stuff. And I finally go get my bag and take it home, and I'm like, "Where's my phone?" Like, oh shoot, I'd still buried in my bag. So I dig it out, and here's these voicemail messages where they're begging me to have a call, and they want to have it that day, and they wanted to do it before the Fast 9 or whatever that
Right.
full
Right.
deal is. I think they've changed the format
Yeah.
now, maybe not. So anyways, yeah, we had a quick call, and it was a crazy good price opportunity. And I think Michael was like, "Hey, we know you've wanted to get in. We've obviously got inventory here that we're having a tough time filling. We're hoping that if you come in and it's a positive experience for you, maybe it might lead to something better." So, so anyways, yeah, I was all over it, and it was, we weren't prepared, right? So, usually you go into these things and you have your marketing team doing quite a bit to try to get you in position, but as ill prepared as we were, it still made quite a buzz, and we got quite a bit of exposure from it.
Absolutely.
Particularly for us, it's a worldwide race,
Yeah.
but in Indiana,
Huge.
right, and right in our own backyard. And then in September of that year, we took the name and title rights for the music center.
Right. Well,
So that was, so all of a sudden it was quite a, it was, if summer ends September 21st or whatever, it was quite a summer we had.
It certainly was. It's interesting in Indianapolis, if you're in the real estate industry, you have to be careful saying Ruoff, because you don't want people to misunderstand that it's the music, like,
Yeah.
Are you talking about, you talk about the music center, or you talk about the mortgage company? And so you guys are just.
Do you remember the controversy when we first took the naming rights, and the change we made after 2 years?
No.
So
I don't know what you're talking
our company, our company went through a rebrand in 2019.
Right.
When we went to that rebrand, we went from being Ruoff Home Mortgage to Ruoff Mortgage.
Yes.
Which was what the company was originally titled. I changed it to Ruoff Home Mortgage when I first took it over, and I just felt it had kind of a warmer sound to it in 2008.
Yeah.
But then we felt like, okay, now it's not as efficient. But when it was the Ruoff Home Mortgage Music Center, you cannot believe the heat and the complaining that I got for 2 years. So I finally thought, okay, we're gonna
just because it was a mouthful.
Yes.
Okay.
And so I said, we're going to, when we rebrand, actually went to the rebrand, that was their biggest thing. They said, hey, you need to shorten it. And so we thought, okay, well, we'll go back to the music center, and we felt like we had enough brand recognition, awareness at that point in time. We'll see if it proves to be a mistake. Sounds like from what you're talking about it, maybe it is, but
no.
We
It's
said,
not. It's not been a bad thing.
We'll make the concert goers happy, and we'll actually not even make it Ruoff Mortgage Music Center. We'll just make it Ruoff Music Center. But the irony of that is, you're never going to make everybody happy, right? The irony of that is that there's so many people out there that think I own the music center.
Oh, I'm sure.
And
does it help that your last name's Music?
So they send me complaints, and it can be the fact, about how in the world can you conscionably charge that much for a 16-ounce draft beer, or I'm in the, they're in the grass section, and it's maybe from a girl, and somebody got on their blanket, and her boyfriend got into a fight with them, and they got thrown out, and they didn't even get to see the concert, and they want their money back, and they want something to happen to the other person that got on their blanket, and you're going, okay, let me see if I can redirect you.
You're getting emails, or how are people getting a hold of you?
Email.
Okay.
So my email's on the company website.
Right. Okay. Wow. How awesome has that been? Because I would say, so many people have talked over the years with me about how the amazing branding that Ruoff has done. It felt like for a long time, and still does, that you guys are everywhere, particularly like in 2017, all of a sudden there was this explosion.
Yeah.
And how did it even come about, and how would you say the benefits been worth it?
It has been phenomenal, and I don't want to get into too many of the details, but we had a kind of a similar situation I would describe to IndyCar, and that Clips had been on the Music Center,
Yeah.
and they were on like a 10-year contract, or when it expired, they had not yet been able to land a name and title sponsor.
Okay.
And so what they want are long-term contracts. There's continuity, so the name's not always changing on the place, right? And I think you're starting to see that more and more, where stadiums and whatever, they don't, and then acquisitions and stuff that disrupts it, that it makes it kind of messy. But they just went ahead and left Clips on for free the next year, because they didn't want to change the name and then get a new name and title sponsor and change it again. So they just gave them a Greenmeyer for a year.
Gotcha.
And I think they might have had somebody that they were in pretty deep negotiations with. My recollection could be not accurate now, but somehow they broke down at the last second, and they were kind of counting on that, and spent most of their energy that year working on that relationship. And when it fell through, now they're looking at going another year without it. So they got pretty aggressive in terms of the deal that they worked out with us. But they've been a fabulous partner. When COVID came in and it completely canceled a season of concerts, we worked out a terrific deal where we just paid them all year long, even though we didn't have any concerts, and then they restructure a contract and with makeups in there. But I've felt like it's been a really good relationship in terms of how well we've worked together. We did 2 or 3 employee appreciation events there, where we had private concerts where we bring in an artist.
I've been there.
Yeah, like a Flo Rida, and I can't remember all of the names now, but so those things are pretty neat. And it felt like when things reopened back up with COVID, and probably in all aspects of life, it was already something that's synonymous with younger people, where they're more interested in experiences than they are things, that kind of stuff. Well, you take something like music, and you don't have it for a year and it comes back. It's amazing how the attendance now at the Music Center is.
Oh yeah.
I think the year we came in, they were 3rd globally in annual attendance for outdoor amphitheater music centers, and after the first year we were on with them, they went to number 1. And it used to be, it seemed like maybe every 6th or 7th event in the season that would be the real marquee name would you wouldn't see grass in the corners when you'd look up from the amphitheater. And it seems like they're back to the fence now.
Yes.
And no matter who's coming in there and playing, if they're if they
it's true.
If they got their wash tub, instrument or whatever, it seems like people want to come and see them. So it's been terrific. I'm not sure what our contract ending date is, but it got stretched out. And
okay.
We feel like strategically it matched up with what used to be the summer selling season. Now we don't have that. It's year-round selling season, right? Because if somebody's trying to get a house and it's in the middle of the school year, it's November or February, and they normally would be fewer people that want to move. Now people are going to move whenever they have to, if it gets them in the home they want, right? So I don't think we have quite the amplitude of summer selling season, but it just seemed like it aligned well with that, where our name was in front of people. It is a pretty decent summer destination in terms of the reach and pull they have, that would end up touching all of our rural markets. It might touch a Terre Haute or a Muncie or a Fort Wayne or South Bend or or Bloomington or whatever, and even getting people coming across state lines. So it's one of those. We do more on activation and lead gathering now than we've done in a while. We've got some photo booth stuff and some engagement ways to be able to get subscribers, so to speak, and doing giveaways, and where we can begin to kind of tell them a little bit about our story. And so it's been good.
Fast forward to today, let's talk a little bit about interest rates. And there's been a lot of hand wringing over interest rates in our industry for years now, it feels like. I mean, really since the middle of 2022 when rates kind of went from 3% to 7%, it felt like overnight practically. I know there's a lot of real estate people out there hoping that we can get rates down closer to 6 or even into the 5, so that the discrepancy between the rate that the seller or homeowner has at 2.5, 3.5, 4, whatever it is, compared to 7 right now, they just are having trouble deciding, okay, I'm going to sell. What kind of expertise and insight do you have on interest rates that you think people should know?
In terms of where they're going or how soon they're going to come down?
Yeah, yes.
So I'll try to not be political, but it's going to be kind of challenging, I guess, because right now we couldn't be in a more political time than the environment we're in right now. The problem is simple. Government spending is so far out of control that it might sound hyperbolic or whatever, but it's not sustainable. It absolutely is not sustainable. And so I think what the deficit's running at $6 trillion a year right now. Total deficit's 30-some trillion. And as an example, next month, the government has it's like 86 billion of 10-year notes that they're rolling that come due that are financed at like 2.1%, and they're going to get financed at 4.55%. So it's that snowballing part of so we're spending more money on interest than we are on defense. And 2 or 3 other, there are these kind of hallmark metrics that any
it's like the
civilized countries that once they're spending more on interest than they are on defense, it's usually not long until they're failing. So we have got to, and we don't know yet. We'll see how the facts play out, but it does appear that the bureaucracy has gotten so out of control, and the accountability around where our money's going and who truly understands that, and are these the sorts of things that we can afford to do? Are these the sorts of things that it's fair to tell an American taxpayer that from a global standpoint that we supposedly have an enormous amount of Social Security benefits that are leaving the country and going to people in other places in the world. And so trying to get a handle on that, and if we do have $1 trillion a year that we might be able to save by downsizing, just like any business, right? I think waste and fraud in the private sector is about 2 or 3%, and they speculate in government it's as high as 20%. And the difference is you or I would go out of business, right? We don't have that option to be wasteful like that. And so sadly, the government doesn't have that option as well. And until we get the supply down, it's supply and demand. Yeah. So you got bond investors that show up and they've got certain needs that, they're using these instruments to hedge their business, or they're just fixed income, insurance companies or whatever, and they've got a set need. And if the government's got more bonds than there are buyers, then they've got to pay them a premium to get them to buy everything that they have to sell that day. And so your other point, though, was this headwind that's caused by somebody that's sitting in a 2.5 or 3% mortgage, and how close do we have to get to that before they're willing to sell their home? Mm-hmm. And I've just, as I was flying up here today, I was just reading, we just got a horrible producer price index reading this morning that's showing hot inflation. Something similar 2 days ago with the CPI. Yep. But what I also read was that home listings are at their fastest pace since going back 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And what we know is that ultimately life gets in the way. So you love your mortgage rate or whatever, but something happens and there are life events that force you to have to sell your home. You know, unfortunately, death is one of them. Sometimes it's divorce.
Yep.
Sometimes it's my job is moved. Sometimes it's the home doesn't work for me now. And while I, and it works for me more significantly than my interest rate's working for me, right? So I'm willing to make a move. There have been folks that bought that nicer home 3 years ago because inflation was transitory.
Mm-hmm.
And now it hasn't, and they've pretty well run themselves dry, and so they're saying, okay, now I'm selling and I'm going to downsize to something that I can't afford. And so you're seeing those listings come on. So I think it's going to improve. I think it's improving right now, but until we get something meaningfully done on the deficit, it appears that there are enough agencies that were started by executive order rather than something that's requires congressional acts that allows maybe some swift things to happen, and even for those departments of the federal government that do have congressional oversight, the executive branch has the ability to downsize the number of employees. So I think that's probably the first step. I think every single year since 23, we've had some sense that, okay, we're going to begin to see moderation. We started to see things come down in September, and then the day the Fed cut rates, and they went a whole 50 basis points,
right,
it completely undid all the progress that we were making. If we could just get back to where we were last September, it would be wonderful. We were hovering, with good credit borrowers, so we were hovering around 6% at that point.
Yes, I remember.
So,
you have a prediction when we'll get back to 6?
I think we will this year.
A lot of people will be happy to hear that. That would be great.
The downside is that there's going to be some pain getting there. It is going to take some job loss.
Right.
It is going to take. So, one other area that will have a significant effect, but you just can't snap your fingers, is we can get oil prices down quite a bit from where they are right now. And so when you look at transportation costs, it touches everything.
Yeah.
And so there's no silver bullet. It's a multiple number of things that have to happen. But it appears that there are maybe more people, citizens, voters, behind something meaningfully happening right now than there ever has been, and that's a critical piece of seeing them successful with it. But so I suspect, Powell just spoke 2 or 3 days ago and commented that there's not urgency,
right,
for them to move, but that he expects that there will be some rate cuts through the year, and he believes that from here we'll see, as they cut rates, we'll see rates come down. The Fed funds rate has nothing to do with mortgage rates, right?
Right, absolutely.
That, right? It's
a lot of people don't understand that.
That 10-year is maybe the more directly correlated instrument, and
yes,
until we get the supply down, it's going to be difficult.
How difficult has it been to manage flying high in 2021 to 2022? All of a sudden, things changed.
So 2022 was difficult, but only because of, sometimes we're like parents, as we're telling people as they're just slaying it, that, hey, this doesn't last forever. You need to,
Right.
keep your spending in line, don't add debt, save some money, that kind of stuff. And there's this natural tendency, not across the board, but you have some folks that, it's like that teenage kid, they kind of shake their head at you and they say, you're right, that is what's happening to all these people around me. But in my instance, it's really just the market finally appreciating the service offering that I bring. And I'm finally come of age, and this is kind of where I'm going to be. And so 2022 was actually a really good year. It just didn't feel like it because it was such a drop off from where people were.
Right.
And then you take it down a notch again and take it down a notch again. It's been challenging. It's been challenging because it's two things take place. One, you've got an incredible supply of consumers that shrinks, but while you've got an incredible supply of consumers, you can begin to shortcut processes and steps that you take along the way to keep your pipeline full, because you don't need to do those things. But you don't drop them all at one time. You just sort of atrophy and slowly lose this, and this. And then when you wake up and now you're really dead in the water and you don't even know where to start, as strange as that sounds, right? And maybe some of them do know where you start, but they also recognize what it was like to build their business the first time around, and that you don't just say, okay, I'm recommitted, and then the next day after that, the business starts to come to you. You've got to show up every day and do those blocking and tackling fundamental activities that we know lead to prolific lead generation. And it's a slow building process. And so it's a lot of coaching, it's a lot of mentoring. And then the other part of this is it's been, for decades, it's been a challenge where we've got an aging demographic, and from a realtor originator standpoint, it was probably maybe a little bit worse with origination than it was, with real estate than it was with origination. Now I think maybe we've caught up. And so somebody that's allowed their business to atrophy, and now they wake up and they're in an entirely different environment. Maybe they never were, we're always were adverse to social media or some of the digital tactics that are necessary. I don't know what you see. We have people that do really, really well with that.
Chris Cannon's amazing.
Yeah,
Mark Harden.
Laura Mullins.
Oh, okay.
Up 65.
Yeah.
But we also have some folks that do none of that, like zero of it, and like Larry Dickey.
Yeah.
You don't ever see him online, right? And he's always right there. So there are different ways you can go. And so if you're not someone that naturally does well with, and it used to be just sharing a closing picture with your clients was a great strategy, right? Now it's got to be reels, it's got to be video, it's got to be, you've got to be able to transfer, be able to tell people who you are, and be likable, be magnetic, and understand what's appropriate content, and actually having the gift to understand that some of the most what might appear for a second uninteresting things actually are great social media content. Something as you're living your life during the day, you just kind of catalog it and push it out there, and people love it, and something silly happened to you and you share it, and so, like, I don't know if you've had a chance, like Doug and Julie Carroll do this they call it WTF, what the fort, and and they go around and
I
they're
haven't seen it.
they're either dining someplace, and so they just kind of pop on, or sometimes they're in their car. Yeah, it's so
I'll follow them.
there's a lot of stuff out there, but then we have folks that do unbelievably well, and they do it because, like I'll use Larry as an example. He's a little bit like Dave Ruoff. He's got this route that he runs, and like he always dines on Tuesdays at this particular barbecue restaurant, and he's always meeting with this group of people, and then the next day he's got kind of a standing kind of deal here, and then he has one day that's like a wild card or whatever. But I think it's, and I don't want to not give him credit. I don't know how much of it is that like this is like just a direct strategy he's built around his business, but I'm sure that he's connected the dots and understands that this works really, really well. But it's just this consistent where you're present. And there are folks that just do really, really well in terms of how they take care of. You get a referral from a real estate agent. There's nothing worse than if you don't execute. Right? I mean, there's absolutely nothing worse in the world. And the flip side of that is not just getting closed on time, but recognizing what that extra 10 or 15% of engagement, care, not leaving stones unturned, recognizing that every customer is unique. And so I want to try to understand I want to set expectations accurately, but I also want to understand that each client has a right to have their own sort of expectations around how that service is going to work for them, and your ability to meet them where they want to be met. Those are gifts. You can coach that. You can get somebody who's not very good at it, and you can make them better. But then there are these people that are just really, really good at it, and they're people of their word. Usually I keep using the word authentic, but I think that's just it's probably an overused word today, but it's the currency weight of that is higher today in a digital world where everything kind of feels transactional and fast, and
Yes.
So
I couldn't agree more.
So what do you do with your agents? I know this is this is your show.
It's a
but
conversation.
What do you do with your agents?
Well, with regard to social media, or
just in regard to. So real quick, I asked you a question, then I'm gonna throw one other point in that's I have always been. We always look at units and we look at dollar volume, and I think if you talk to any commission salesperson, they're going to put dollar volume in front of units because that's where they're, right. That if they're getting paid basis points, that's where they're going to make more money. I've always said that you focus on units and the dollar volume will take care of itself, but it also will make you less vulnerable in a down market because you're going to have probably more transactions and more people you're talking to, and if you're doing it the right way, more chances that a past customer is going to send you business, etc. The age-old problem, and this kind of speaks to the whole COVID downturn thing, is that I run into so many folks in the business that their goal and their idea of success is that they'll get to a point where they can get away from their business.
Yeah.
And success and getting away from your business do not work in housing finance or real estate. Or if it does, it doesn't work very long, and all of a sudden it starts to erode because they discount the value that they bring to the equation. And COVID allowed some people to kind of get away from their business, and then the thought of having to get back in their business initially, it's like that ice cold pool you got to get into, and doesn't feel, it's the insulation's been taken off of your wires, and so you don't have that kind of natural ability to roll with the the things that come at you?
I would say it's been very challenging in general in our industry for agents to get, not everybody, obviously, there's people that are popping right up to the top because of it, but to get back into mode, to get into gear, and have not really hit the ground running the way that they were before. Part of that's the market. Part of that is there'll be some interesting studies on how COVID really affected all of us. And do you feel like Ruoff is now back in full gear?
I don't think any company out there is back in full gear.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm clinging to something that I need to not cling to. I have this sense in my mind of what normal looks like.
Right.
And I don't feel like this doesn't feel normal to me. It feels like as good as it could feel in a down market.
Yeah.
Right. And so, part of that, when I say it's not back to normal, part of that is that we need these interest rates to come back down. That the irony of it is that one side of the equation is, even with affordability, is something to be optimistic about for the next 15 years. The demographics around
Right.
housing demand and where it's going to be, it's not going anywhere. We have to figure out how to fix affordability. If we don't, it might be the number one. I say, maybe it was this past election, but shelter for our people could be like the number one political topic at the next presidential election. It might be for the midterms. So do you feel like there was any favorable offset in terms of transaction sizes for everybody getting bigger, and so they're at least getting bigger commissions, or does it feel like
Yeah, that's a great point. I definitely have thought about that. I mean, when you have the average price of a home essentially go up 50% in a few years, and then what's really been an interesting result of the commission lawsuit situation was that while everyone thought the average commission was going to come down, or a lot of people did, what you could see was the possibility that the average commission might actually tick up. And on both buyer and seller sides, you're seeing some of that. And so, but the volume has been beat down to such, lowest
we
levels.
Need units, right?
Yeah, the units just aren't there. I mean, there's not enough people buying and selling. And the demand is absolutely there. It's so pent up that someday there's going to be this burst. But
and then along comes like insurance. Like you have all these,
yes.
like we needed another headwind, right?
Right.
And that looks like that's even going to get it's.
Well, the insurance isn't helpful. How's that affecting Sarah's business?
So it's been, as you can imagine, it's been wonderful. She hates it. And she's lost some clients, but she probably feels like she's picked some up because somebody else is mad at their company they've been with for 15 years because they don't understand how in the world I could get a premium increase like this, but overall their premium dollars of business is, she had some good COVID years, but this is all of a sudden kind of approaching back to where the total commission revenue that the brokerage is pulling in is been a big uptick.
Okay.
So I've got a small title company. We've got the insurance company. I've got an appraisal management company. Those entities, because they're more kind of cookie cutter, they've actually, they're doing decent.
Yeah.
Title, when you're killing it, it's not outstanding. So you kind of have a different strategy with it, where you're just trying to make sure that you're really watching your expenses and making sure you're focusing on the 3 or 4 biggest priorities and not let yourself get distracted. And then it does, they do decent, but they don't have the upside that.
Right. I'll wrap it up with this. A few years ago, I think we were in Miami at one of your trips, and we talked about owning a business and the challenges of owning a business, and you said something that really resonated with me that I've thought about prior to that, and I've thought about it a whole bunch after, and that is it really comes down to your appetite for risk. I don't know if you remember that conversation, but you always felt that you were a risk taker?
Yes. So at like a baseline, you might agree with me in this respect. If somebody is willing to work for 100% commission, they've got a higher appetite for risk than somebody that needs a structured salary.
Yes.
Set up, right? With a discretionary bonus at the end of the year if they did well, right? So to that extent, like I've always kind of been wired that that's how my compensation, whether that's earnings from a company that I own or whatever, that's kind of where it's coming from. There is something that distorts that a little bit, and I think that that would be how much enjoyment the business that you're in brings you. And so, maybe something like that distorts your judgment. I don't know that it necessarily has to, but if it's something that you're excited about, that you think about when maybe this is the time that you're getting away from whatever you're doing as a, for your livelihood, when you are in your free time to do whatever you want and recreate, and you're still thinking about that, I think it becomes much easier to take risks, and maybe the risks are actually mitigated a little bit because of the fact that you've got such a passion and you're so hyper focused on it that probably ensures the likelihood of a better outcome. So I'm with this soccer club and doing the stadium. This is as big a risk as I can say that I've ever taken at any one time. I'm in a position to be able to take the risk and not jeopardize.
So is it still risky?
Well, it is to this extent. Is it risky to put a $500 wager down at a blackjack table and play a hand of blackjack? Now, so if you mean risk that could turn your world upside down,
right?
I wouldn't say I would probably. I'll never take a risk like that again, not intentionally.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Why would you?
Pardon me?
You've taken some risks over back in the day, I'm sure, where it was more like that.
Well, sometimes you don't realize how much risk you're taking until, as an example, in COVID, there was a stretch there in March, April, really, and at every turn there was something new. All of a sudden, they were saying, you had to pay somebody to take your servicing asset, an asset that normally would be worth 125, 150 basis points at time of execution. When you deliver, you can sell it, monetize it. You had to pay somebody to take the servicing, because with forbearance and people not having to make their payment, it was going to appear that, well, and with Ginny it was that way, the servicer has to make that borrower's payments until they're out of forbearance. And then it was not clear as to how you were going to get paid back, or if you were going to get paid back.
Wow.
So, those are once in a lifetime sort of circumstances that probably took some of the safest businesses in the world out there and put them at risk for a moment or two. But usually it's like that's where the magic happens, is in those most kind of high wire kind of. I don't know that I would say right now, I'll be 64 this year. I don't know that I have the same kind of. I mean, it's a grind. You know what I mean? So real quick, I'll get to wrap up. one thing that I know that I was most intrigued with about what you guys were doing at Easy Street and High Garden was you guys were, you had a different model. You were one of the early companies into lead aggregation and whatever. And so the natural fit with that was the strategy you guys pursued relative to agents, but you guys brought in a whole lot of new people that had never been in the business. Had systems to get them trained and et cetera.
Well, and we had all come from a builder, and so in the beginning we were really focusing on new homes, and we were generating leads for people that were renting and turning them into first-time home buyers usually with a builder. And so we just got really good at marketing and creating those opportunities. And so we were pulling a lot of people from builders that were good salespeople for the builders. And then
didn't realize how good they were, right? And it seemed safe where they were because it's fixed location. The leads are coming to me. I don't have to go out and hunt my own.
And they would get tired of being in a model home all on the weekends, and get tired of when they have the opportunity to sell any builder or any home versus just this builder's development.
Yeah.
And so for years, I would say we did bring in quite a few of newbies and beginners into real estate, that we had this system that provided opportunities and kept them and their business moving in the right direction. As over the years, the idea of a lead has really changed and been minimized. I mean, the same lead is going to Zillow, it's going to Realtor.com, it's going to wherever, and it's going to us. We've changed quite a bit. We're not that we don't ever bring in new people anymore. We do occasionally, and some of our team leaders will bring in new people underneath them. But we've really, at this point,
it's difficult to maintain that business model and revenue split, et cetera, today, like you were able to do that at one stretch, probably, right?
Yeah, definitely. And not just for us, for the entire industry. The agents control, as much as they ever have, how much they're going to get paid. And so providing value and all the support and everything that they need, they want that, but then they also want, all the commission too. And hey, who doesn't? So, threading
funny that way, aren't they?
Yeah, well, they are people. And so I'm sure your folks also want to have their cake and eat it too sometimes. But, as we move into 2025, and I do think that the market hasn't really felt that this way so far, but I agree with you. The market is on what's going to be on an upswing. Rates are going to come down and pent-up demand is there. What about for you? And we'll wrap it up with this. You're 64. You're talking about succession. You're almost 64. I don't want to jump ahead. What's your next 5 years look like?
I see them being probably similar to what I'm doing right now.
Okay.
But
you gonna be like Dave, where you come into the office until forever?
I'm not the people person that Dave was. And I'd say that unfortunately, that's not really who I am. I'm probably a little more awkward, where he's just he had that gift. I see myself trying to work on being the best I can be as part of that succession plan. And I recognize that to the outside world, it looks like it's the team and Blake that all the pressure's on, but it really is. So as an example, I tell you that I enjoy the strategy and I enjoy the executive meetings weekly. I show up purposely about an hour and a half into the meetings now.
Really? are the meetings?
It depends. They fluctuate. We have some that will start at 9 a.m. and they might run to 1:30, 2 o'clock. Sometimes that's my fault. And then there are other times when there's less that we're pushing on that, or time of the year or whatever, where maybe they might end at 11 o'clock, something like that.
Okay.
So I enjoy the meetings. They're marathons. They're once a week. But the process for me to be able to do things that I want to do, but also be respectful of the process, and because I'm not going to be around forever, and I see it as my responsibility for the entire organization to get that succession process right for the benefit of everybody else.
Yes.
Long after the dinosaurs like myself are gone.
Mark, thank you so much for sitting down and having a conversation with me.
I apologize for the scheduling snafus from the last go round, but
Not at all.
I
This is
appreciate
great.
I appreciate you